Welcome to the Apex Sunday podcast, co hosted by myself, Robert Ross, and John Dowsett. Taking a little bit of a break, and we're going to cover Aragon and Misano this particular podcast. And John, I have to say that the biggest impression I got was the pleasure of watching the top rider at the very top riding just superbly. And I guess we could start with Aragon. What were your initial impressions of Aragon?
A masterclass by Marc.
Hmm.
Just phenomenal, so smooth, not like his usual riding, and just a spectacular race.
Hmm. Yeah, bring up a quote from Gilles Villeneuve, who said Formula One kind of lost its way when going sideways was no longer quick. And so we had at Aragon a slippery circuit, and Mark adapted as if it wasn't slippery and everyone else like it was slippery. I will say that Martin, so we had Mark at the very top. Martin really distinguished himself after Mark compared to the rest. And then the rest were, down quite significantly. So that 8.4 tenths margin in qualifying, super, super big. And we see that this sort of going sideways and sliding around. I think Mark does that well. Binder does that well as well. So I've always liked to see Binder in these kind of situations. And the coverage was superb. So again, with these kind of difficult situation with the track, we saw Fabio Quartararo excel, and he had a great battle with Pecco during the sprint at Aragon. So that was very nice to see. And again, the coverage showing that instead of just showing the front was superb. And I will say that the expectation, given that Mark's performance in practice and qualifying was he has to win both the sprint and the race. And I could feel that kind of pressure was palpable. What do you think of? Did you feel that or?
It's his home track, right? And what he was able to do, I think it was you that told me that he had 5 degrees more lean angle than any other rider. And
Yeah.
he looked solid. It wasn't like he was twitchy. Um, so yeah, I think he just turned it on and put his head down and did it.
Hmm.
Uh, and nobody came close. Nobody. I mean, in every session, Mark was the ruling class, wasn't he?
Yeah. And that bike is definitely not as good as the 2024 bike. So just as you
Yeah.
said, a master class. The other thing that stood out to me was the bad starts from Pecco using the starting device and the
Hmm.
slippery nature of the start grid. And we've talked before about, the new rules when they come into effect, there will be no lowering devices, no starting devices. And Mark's a big proponent of that, as is Casey Stoner, even though he's not in it anymore. And this particular race shows why, doesn't it? Because without any aids, he distinguished himself. The rider makes the difference. And again, Martin, well ahead of almost everyone but Mark as well. So I really enjoyed that it was more focused on the rider and the results getting that done.
It is nice putting in that, but the one thing that does sort of make it more of a an even keel is putting in rules like tire pressure, and I think that should go away.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's on the other end of the spectrum, right? I mean, the tire
Mhm.
pressure thing is just ridiculous.
Yes, it is. It's one of those things where there's sort of perhaps a good concept around it, but the side effects of it and enforcing it is just makes for some terrible racing at times and
Hmm.
the inability to pass that much. So not very good in that respect. And then, of course, we saw the Alex Pecco incident. I think it was a racing incident. Pecco offered an apology, suggesting that Alex ran into him intentionally. He's very angry, but he apologized. So credit to Pecco for that. And I think we saw a lot of people saying, it was 50-50 or 70 Alex, 30 Pecco or 60
Yeah.
Pecco, all these kind of things. But these are very experienced riders, and this happens at times. I've seen Pecco, I call it the Pecco pounce, where he sees an opportunity and takes it. And sometimes that works out wonderfully. He did it last year in Australia. He tried it at Jerez this season and he had a collision with Mark. And then again here, and the collision happened. But I think as much ado about nothing for the most part. What are
Absolutely.
your
I mean,
thoughts
it's
on the
pure
incident?
pure racing, pure racing. That's all it
Hmm.
is. And you know what? Neither of them could have gotten out of it.
Hmm.
It was definitely not. In my mind, it was nobody's fault. Um, it was bad judgment on Pecco's part. That's like we've said before. Passing on the outside is risky, and what is it? That's a low percentage move.
Right. Right. So, something, and we've seen this over and over again, the very best crash into each other from time to time, regardless of the motorsport. So, if you had none of these, not that I'm promoting crashes or into each other, but if you had none of these, then they wouldn't be really racing that much, would they? So, it's going to happen from time to time.
Within reason.
And
This
of
isn't
course,
NASCAR.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if you were aware, if you saw that. I can't remember the guy who his spotter was telling him to just wreck these two guys, and he won the race by quote wrecking two guys. And it's like, that's not racing to me. So
No.
no. And of course, at Aragon, we saw a big swing in the championship where Pecco lost a lot of points, having not finished the race, and Martin did very well. So, how did that lead into Misano? And that's where we go next, to Misano. And Mark had that crash in qualifying, which put him down into ninth. So we've come to expect big comebacks, but in the sprint that didn't happen. It looked very difficult to pass. But having said that, he went from ninth to fifth, and those passes at the last lap were spectacular. That one on Acosta, he was so far back, but he got right to where Acosta couldn't turn. Somehow managed to keep the bike up and passed him. It was again a guy who creates passes on a circuit that is difficult to pass. So I was very impressed by that. What do you think of those things?
Very, very difficult to pass, and throwing it in from so far away. Yeah, that takes either a very low IQ or a very, very bold man. And the riders know it's him, right?
Yeah. And that comes back to what we were saying about Alex and Pecco. Like the line between a crash and a successful pass can sometimes be very small. And there were no complaints about Mark's passing during the sprint. So the riders were fine with it. And it was very impressive. We
Hmm.
saw Martin extend his lead again in the sprint. So it was interesting to see Pecco very angry at not winning the race. So he, had anger in Mizano, sorry, in Aragon, and anger in Misano.
Yeah.
But he still salvaged what he could. So I thought that was good on Pecco. Um, but come the race, massive swing in the championship again, with Pecco finishing second and gaining a lot of points. So he was like 23 down at the beginning, and now he's 7 down. Uh, Before we talk about Mark's race, what did you think of Martin coming into the pits for rain tires with a few other riders? I will say that it's one of those things where it's a gamble. When it doesn't work, you look kind of foolish. And when it does work, you look like a genius. People have been on him a bit. I don't think he deserves to be ridiculed for this
Not at
decision.
all. Not at all.
So he made it. It was the wrong one, but we've seen that Mark's done it as well. Mark's known for not making the wrong decisions, but he's done that in the past. So it just he afterwards he said he's going to do what Pecco does in these kind of situations, which makes sense because he's the focus at the moment. But you were saying he doesn't deserve ridicule for that at all.
No, no. I mean, and he wasn't the only one sliding around. Um,
Hmm.
so no,
Morbidelli lost it, right?
so it could have been a hero move. Could
Hmm.
have been the first of the whole field to do it, but it just didn't
Yeah,
work out that way, did it?
no. No, he could have taken a lot of points if it did work out and had a massive margin, and he still has a margin. So it's just one of those things to me. But then we get to Mark's race. As soon as the rain started, on that lap where Martin went in, he passes five riders in one lap, takes the lead, and and sustains the lead under pressure from Pecco. And again, once the conditions changed, he was 5 seconds back on that lap, and he made all that time in one lap. This was, to me, an exquisite ride. This is why, when there's not a lot of dicing, I can still enjoy a race if the ride or the drive, if you're in a car, is just exquisite, and you take a race win that probably wasn't there in completely dry situations. So it was just a he has like a vision for the entire race. Like, he knows what to do when the situation changes, and he took advantage of it. And so I just really enjoyed watching a spectacular ride like that.
What he's able to do is miraculous. I look back to when I was racing, and if you could back to back do 3 laps that were brilliant, it felt pretty
Mhm.
damn good. But this guy's just every lap, like lap after lap after lap after lap after lap. It's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Mhm. And the way he was riding, I'm not going to say it was like when he rode, how he rode the Honda, but the way he rode, his body language on the bike, it just seemed like he had total confidence in the bike. And with what happened at Aragon and what happened here, people have to be concerned. And he's made up a lot of points in the championship. He's 53 behind now. People are saying, he's in the hunt again. It's very difficult. That's a big margin. Pecco and Martin are not slouches by any means. So when they asked Mark about this, he said, "Well, I have to stop making mistakes in qualifying." He knows he has to be optimal for the whole thing. But everyone said you could tell he's going to try.
Oh
He was
yeah, of
very
course he
excited.
is. Of course he is, and
So,
and
you
he
know,
has
mhm,
the ability to do it, but it's going to take a
he
little bit
does.
of luck in there, isn't it?
It
And
will. Yeah.
for him to do what he's doing on substandard or non-competitive equipment, because it isn't competitive equipment, it's not the same. It's a different
No.
class that he's racing in. Is it just shows what we're witnessing is something we won't see again for a while.
Yeah. And that's why, again, when I first started watching MotoGP, I watched Moto3 race and really was impressed by Joan Mir, the way he rode. And then I saw Mark in MotoGP, and I almost immediately said, "This is another Villeneuve type talent, a guy that you can watch do spectacularly in racing." And he's just a real racer. And so there was some booing on the podium for Mark's win. This is a holdover from the Valentino Rossi conflict from about 10 years ago. Almost everyone condemned it as kind of immature and childish. And what I don't understand is, you're there to watch a MotoGP race. You had the privilege of watching one of the best race riders ever do what he does best, and you boo it. It makes absolutely no sense to me. Why are you watching the sport if you think it's full of cheaters and corrupt and all this kind of stuff? And we saw that in Formula One too. Like, oh, they're only winning because of this or that. And it's,
Yeah,
why are people like this? I don't understand it.
they're fanboys, right? And
I
and,
guess
and
so.
it's
Yeah.
like Tifosi in Formula One. I think I've told the
Right.
story before about being at the Canadian Grand Prix, and uh, I don't know what it was. It was probably 4 or 5 laps, maybe 10 laps into a 70 lap race, and both the Ferraris were out, and just watched this mass exodus of red. They all just left. So,
Yeah.
what are they a fan of? Are they a fan of the sport, or are they a fan of, a team?
Yeah. And I've just, whatever floats your boat. We're all different, but I've always had my favorite riders and drivers. But as long as the race is good and I see something spectacular, I'm pretty happy. So when Schumacher was winning all the time, people were complaining a lot. And I thought, well, look how he's doing it. Look how Senna did it. Look how Prost did it. Look how Lewis did it. Look at Sebastian Vettel. Means it's unfortunate that, we could have had Alonso, Vettel, Hamilton all at the same time, but it seldom happens. And
Right.
so, you know, Mark he dominated from 2013 to 2019, had his injury, and now he's firmly back and he's another factor. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the season because we have had some boring races recently. But if Mark
I
continues on
wouldn't
this
call them boring.
path,
I wouldn't call them
well,
boring. And if you look at what's going on, it's
mhm,
he's putting on a master class. Yeah. And if you're lucky to be able to watch it. I mean, I think that a lot of what has to do with him getting over his injuries, getting over he isn't crashing as much, and he's saying, I don't need to
mhm,
do that anymore. I know how to ride, and he's gone on to a new phase. And
right,
I think this could be really dangerous for all the other riders because now he just knows how to nail it, and he's
yeah,
figured out his riding style 100%, and he's just getting better. It's like Lewis Hamilton. It's like Max Verstappen, who got the nickname
mhm,
Crash Stappen because he was always taking people out. He could drive very quickly, but he couldn't race.
right,
And still a little bit of that, but that doesn't matter. And I think that, Mark has now got it nailed.
mhm. Yeah, he's got excellent racecraft, like Lewis
Hmm.
does too, right? So
Hmm.
that's good to see. So for the Aragon event, rather than rate the sprint and the race, I'll just give the event an entire rating. I'm going to give it an 8, and I'm going to give the rider to Mark. What about yourself for Aragon?
I, I'm turning into a Mark fan, so I'm right exactly where you are. I might even go higher than 8, but yeah,
Right.
8's pretty high. Yeah, it was
Mhm.
good all the way around.
Yeah. And for Misano, I'm going to give the event a 9 because, again, that that ride is just so beautiful. I mean, I just love to see those kind of rides. Uh, so I just really, really enjoyed that race. And again, the rider is obviously Mark for the event. What about yourself?
Exactly the same. I mean, I could go with Bender, but that wouldn't make any sense, would it?
No, but it's great to see Binder getting back to his form again.
Yes.
Pedro Acosta is definitely challenging him, but that's what we want. We want everyone challenging each other. So yeah, wonderful, wonderful event. And they go there within a couple weeks again, a repeat of the race. And Marcus said that's to his disadvantage because of all the data everyone has. But I'm really looking forward to how, having done the race once, they're going to do it all over again and see how everyone adapts to and adjusts to what they learned then. And perhaps the track temperature will be different and so forth. So,
And not so
it's great.
dirty.
Yeah, it's great to see this. It's going to be nice to see another race there.
Hmm.
So,
It's
really
a
looking
beautiful
forward to
track.
that. Mhm. It is. All right. So, until the next Zano event, anything else, John?
No, I'm don't really have anything else other than saying I'm glad that Acosta's not falling off his bike anymore. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm starting to think about next year because there's so many wonderful
Yes.
changes. But that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Mark will have to adapt to another engineer. So he went from Santi Hernandez in Honda to Carcetti in Gresini. I can't remember the name of the engineer in Ducati, but he's shown that he's adapted pretty quickly. And now that he's familiar with the Ducati DNA, perhaps the bike won't be too hard to adapt to. But one thing I forgot to mention was after Aragon, and as soon as Misano started, Mark went to the Honda garage and shared his victory at Aragon with
Mm.
his old mechanics and said, you're part of helping me rebuild my career and so forth. So that was nice to see. And that kind of leadership is what makes a team rally around you rather than treating them fairly badly, doesn't it?
It's great camaraderie.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. see you at the next Misano race and talk to you then. Bye bye,
Good
Mark.
talking to Rob. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.